Hello, it's Greg Galle here, and I am looking forward to our conversation and give a couple minutes for people to show up. I know it's end of the week, and I see that we have a few participants already in. So let's give it a little time. We're just at the bottom of the hour. I'm looking forward to seeing your questions. I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat for that. So if you're out there and you're listening and I see your profile there, I'd love to have you just throw me a hi in the chat so I know that you're there. If you want to give me your name, that would be great. Hey, Chris, good to see you. Daniel, listening for a bit while you can. Yeah, well, we only have 30 minutes, so hopefully we'll get some of your time. I was just uttering your name yesterday, Daniel. It's good to see you in the chat. So let's see, we're at 9:31, and ArcWorks Innovation. Hi, Ed. Good to see you. We were just together a week ago. It seems like a long time, though, already. Put my do not disturb on my phone so it's not buzzing away on my desk there. All right. Okay, Chris. Yeah, thank you for doing that. I appreciate your harvesting. So yeah, let's go ahead. If you want to throw something at me, that's great. Hey there. What is innovation according to Greg Galle? So big topic. Innovation, one is a word that makes a lot of people nervous. I guess that's part of the challenge. I had to fall back to a quote that I heard a long time ago, Steve Jobs quote, which is it sort of inspires me, at least in terms of this work, which is that is real artists ship. So he was making a distinction, I think, between a lot of the invention that was going on at Xerox PARC and the innovation that is the sort of taking of the ideas of the graphical user interface, of the laser printer, of the mouse that he had seen at Xerox PARC and turning those into commercially viable products and actually bringing them to market. So I think there's an important part there, which is it's not just sitting around and doing an R&D effort and sort of leaning heavily into the R part of that, but it's actually the D part that is bringing that product to market, or bringing that service to market, or bringing that policy to market, or that piece of legislation, or maybe it's organizational change and building a new kind of mindset or a new set of behaviors. So essentially, innovation is the work that needs to be done to change the way things are into the way things need to be or should be or you desire them to be. And innovation is that hard work that is required to affect that change. And we hear lots of some people push back on innovation. It feels a little bit like a shop-worn word, but it's important. So we can call it change, we can call it innovation. We're starting to talk a lot about, and the focus of this conversation around capital building, and that's sort of the value that gets created, and the resources that are necessary to do this work. So a lot of I walk around and do this a lot, talking about a predictable path and a bold path. Innovation is that work that enables the from to shift from the way things are to the way things we want things to be. So Good question. Thanks. I think defining terminology is always useful at the top. I know Daniel Halter's on this call, spends a lot of time digging deep into definitions and trying to create clarity around those. What else have we got, Chris, from the community? Yeah, we got a little pause there. What's serious capital? So we've talked about this idea of serious capital building. Serious capital is the concept of looking at capital, that is the resource or energy required to create the value, and looking at that in a more robust way. So you can think about it as multidimensional capital. That's a kind of a technical definition of serious capital. And we use the word serious capital to position it against what we call silly capital. So if we're engaging in an effort, an innovation effort of some sort, if we're pursuing an innovation opportunity, and what we're looking at is only financial capital, which is, I think the world of corporate venturing is really focused on financial capital. Venture capital is focused on finance. But if we're looking at different kinds of organizations in different contexts, then financial capital may in fact be the easiest capital to create, to generate. And there may be other forms of capital that need to be prioritized or ranked higher than that. So when we talk about serious capital, we look at 6 different forms of capital. We look at human capital, we look at financial capital, we look at intellectual capital, political capital, we look at reputation capital, and we look at social capital. So human capital can be both the skills that are required to do something, or building skills in a workforce, for example, or if we're in a military context or in the human trafficking space where we do work fighting human trafficking, then we might be looking at lives and futures. And so trying to create peace and stability isn't about generating financial capital. Although creating a secure environment can enable commerce, it's really about protecting and securing lives. So I would, typically when we're sitting down with a military client and we ask them to rank those 6 forms of capital, we would see human capital, social capital, and political capital always above financial capital. So it's just a more robust set of lenses to look at value creation. And when we talk about building serious capital, what we mean by building capital is the creation of capital, so the creation of new forms of capital, the protection of capital, that is using capital wisely, not putting it unnecessarily at risk in the innovation process, and then the liberation of capital, that is identifying the things that we're currently doing that we shouldn't be doing anymore because they're not producing the value or the impact that we're looking for, and redeploying that capital to the innovation opportunities that actually have a chance to make a bigger difference. So thanks for that. A good question. We're trying to really kickstart this conversation around a different model for value creation and looking at the impact that we're having with our innovation efforts. One of the reasons why that's important to us is that what we see in many organizations is that the potential for different parts of the organization to make meaningful contributions is latent. It's trapped, and it's trapped because the organization is taking this silly capital view. They're looking at the capital creation through too narrow a lens, by only looking at finance. And really in a corporate environment, the only organization that can draw a direct line back to financial capital, a direct line, would be sales. And so you see a lot of organizations become very sales oriented. The sales culture becomes dominant, and it discourages other parts of the organization from feeling like they're making a direct contribution to value. It's harder for them to make that line. If I happen to be in marketing and communications, I am actually building reputation capital. I am doing that in investor relations and in the financial analyst relations group as well. Leadership is doing that. So we want to activate those other parts of an organization so that they understand they can draw direct lines back to value creation that are much more meaningful to them than financial. So how to evaluate these different forms of capital. So One of the ways that we're helping organizations today is with something that we call the Worth It tool. It's part of a next generation of tools that we're building, and the Worth It tool enables an organization to look at each of those 6 forms of capital and evaluate what is the risk that's associated with each form of capital. So what's the risk? If we rate human capital as the most important, what risk does this present, this innovation opportunity? We look at what capital contribution do we believe is going to be made by the innovation opportunity? What capital need is there to actually both develop it and maintain it or operate it? And then we look at the capital impact, and that capital impact score is essentially taking the capital contribution and then subtracting from it a capital need and capital risk score that's been averaged. So you want your capital contribution to exceed the average of your capital risk and your capital need. We can go a step further, and we can not only rank those forms of capital, but we can weight them. And then if we have weighted them, we would weight those scores as well. But that allows an organization to evaluate a vast number of innovation opportunities or proposals, as our friends at ArcWorks do all the time, and to look very quickly through that stack and say, first thing I'm going to do is just look at capital impact. The second thing we ask our clients to do when they're evaluating capital is to also look at what kind of option value is being created for each of those forms of capital. And in early stage innovation, when we're just beginning to get through a formulate stage where we're identifying and validating that there's a real need for the solution that we're going to develop, the option value may be something that we weight more heavily even than the impact score, because the impact scores early on are often quite low. But looking at capital in this way, looking at serious capital in this way, allows me as a decision maker to say, hey, your capital contribution score looks good, your capital impact score doesn't look so good. So what we need to do is look at how do we bring the need down? How do we do this in a way that requires less capital? Or how do we bring the risk down? Is there a way to actually mitigate the risk or eliminate some of that risk? Or can we in fact turn the contribution up? Can this do more? And what we encourage all of our decision-making groups to do is make sure you ask your teams to show you the work. It's not enough to just change the number. If I'm scoring on 1 to 5, with 1 being low impact and 5 being a high impact, the highest impact, it's not enough just to play with the calculator. You actually have to show the work that justifies why you're giving something a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or a 4. Isn't financial bottom line? How do you put dollars to the value you generate through other forms of capital? So that's a great question. Pretty much everything that we do in any sector that we're in ultimately is going to be funded with some form of currency. It's going to be funded with dollars or euros or pesos. Some form of currency is going to be spent. So financial capital is definitely going to be utilized. If we have put financial capital as our lowest form of capital in terms of importance, and we put something like human capital or political capital at the top, then we need to, if we're doing this with rigor and we're doing this with discipline, we need to actually think about what is the conversion rate. Think about those as forms of currency. And we had an interesting conversation in Tucson recently, looking at that from a military context, because if you think about human capital being at the top and both lives and skills, 2 forms of human capital currency, LVS for lives, SKL for skills, how many dollars would you assign to the accumulation or addition of a skill or 10 skills to an airman? Or how many dollars do you assign to the life of an airman? Now, that's a difficult question to ask, both in the defense context, in the context of fighting human trafficking, and where we're seeing people whose lives are being destroyed and exploited and destroyed. It's very difficult to think how many dollars would I assign to that life. But if you are funding the effort of a group and you actually need to use dollars to do that, you have to think about how do we maximize the impact that we're going to have, the number of lives we're going to protect or save, or futures that we're going to create by making sure that people aren't exploited. What are we going to allocate towards that? What's our goal? What's our intention? In the military context, you can use a proxy, which is that an enlisted person gets a life insurance policy, and you can look at that life insurance policy and say, that's the value we're going to use there. It at least gets us a number that we can work with, so we can start sort of thinking about, are we going to achieve what we want to achieve? So we have in the Worth It tool, we actually have a capital converter worksheet or tool that allows you to begin to do that. It's really important to do that work as a team, so that you've normalized what do we mean by these different forms of capital, and how are we assigning financial capital against those. So when we're asking a team about the capital contribution, we're all working from the same hymn sheet, so to speak. What's most, next question here is, what's most important, creating or protecting or liberating? The answer to that, I think the short answer is yes, or it depends. So it depends on the organization. It depends on what its goals are and what its strategy is. As many of you know, we talk about the organizing our innovation opportunities into 4 different portfolios. So we can look at a portfolio which is around innovation opportunities that improve the performance of what is. That's in our optimized portfolio. Oh, I'm actually wearing the shirt. We can look at the grow portfolio. That's doing something new for constituents we currently serve, or modifying something we do to reach constituents we don't currently serve, or doing something brand new. But it's sort of like a product extension or a service line extension that we're going to be able to do more for more people. So we're growing the pie and what we do for the pie. And then we have the renew portfolio. The renew portfolio is, we're going to completely rethink and reinvent. These are innovation opportunities that are really have the potential to be highly disruptive. And the maximized portfolio is, we're going to look at things that we are currently doing, but have diminishing return in terms of the capital contribution that they're making. And we're going to make a decision about when we're going to exit those. And when we exit those, we want to make sure we capture all the value that we can. And so the question of what's important there is, in each of those, we want to think about what's the opportunity to create. In optimize, we might really be putting an emphasis on protecting capital. Hey, we've got capital here. We want to do it in a way that protects it. We might create some more by being more efficient or more productive, but really it's about holding on to that. Growth is usually about creating new value. Certainly, the renew is about creating new value and capturing a significant new value. And liberating is what we'd be doing in that maximized portfolio. So where are there opportunities to actually free up capital that we can deploy into opportunities that have the potential to do more, to produce more for us. So they're all important, and it depends on the portfolio, and depends on the goals that each of those portfolios is intending to produce. Monica just asked, how can an organization know where and how to start? That's a question. Thanks, Monica. That's a question we get a lot. And the reality is that most organizations are, in terms of the innovation systems that they've established, they're seriously lagging the performance system. So most organizations, it doesn't matter what the sector is, if you're in the private sector, public sector, nonprofit, civil society, defense, most organizations actually are built as performance systems. That is, they have a known set of solutions to a known set of problems, and their focus is on optimizing the performance of that entity. So we hear people focused really on efficiency and productivity and increasing margins, decreasing costs, return on investment, that sort of thing, that we all have felt that pressure in organizations. Most organizations are pretty immature in establishing with the same rigor and structure and discipline as the performance system and innovation system. And so where do we start with an innovation system? Those of you who know us may know we have an innovation readiness assessment. That innovation readiness assessment actually asks organizations to look at 51 different components of an innovation system and to self-evaluate on a score of 1 to 5. How are we doing? 1, we do it ad hoc. 2, it's emerging. 3, it's established. 4, it's actually being integrated into our other systems. And 5, where it's mature and we're optimizing the performance of it. So but 51 components can be really overwhelming. So where do we start? What are the tent poles that are going to hold this up? we look at 5 components as places where organizations really should be focusing their attention when they're serious about capital building, when they're serious about doing innovation that actually builds capital. And that those are portfolio management. So do we have an approach to our next portfolios, as I just described? Do we have a clear and understood by everybody involved in the system development process? Are we using a discovery-driven development process? Can we map the development cycle, what we call the next cycle? How do things move? How do innovation opportunities move and get developed in our organization? Is there clarity around the decision-making criteria that we're using to decide what's going to move through that cycle and what's not going to advance? So we call that the Super 7. Many of you may be aware of our methodology for that. What are the 7 questions we need to ask of every innovation opportunity? And then how we put in place a set of operating principles, next rules that govern how this work is going to be done that will be very different than the rule set or the operating principles that govern the performance system. And if we don't articulate them, our organization will default to the performance systems rule set, which is built to minimize risk and is not built to encourage exploration and discovery, experimentation, all the things that are necessary in an innovation system to move from uncertainty to certainty. And then finally, and part of that, not only is it the operating principles, but do we have the governance structure in place, the executive decision makers, the next board that makes decisions about what's going to move forward, and next advocates who are working in the now or the performance system, who are going to be advocates for the work that's being done and going to actually be responsible for the transition of what's next into the now. That's going to actually take those innovations and move them into the existing organization. And finally, we focus on next funding. That is, how are we funding these opportunities in a way that protects capital and maximizes the ability of those opportunities to build capital? And it's a very different funding structure than an annual operating budget. It looks more like a venture capital fund and less like an annual operating budget. So when organizations ask where to start, we say, let's start by building those capabilities because they have a profound ripple effect across the other 46 components of the system. Another question says, can you say building serious capital equals innovation? Not all innovation equals serious capital building, but serious capital building requires innovation. And what I mean by that is many organizations are engaged in innovation activity where they haven't actually stepped back and said, why are we doing it? And what is the value we're trying to create? And what's the impact we want to have? They get excited about a technology. AI is a great example of that. Lots of people are excited about AI. We know there's lots of buzz. We know there's lots of money going towards it. So we got to be doing it. There's a sense of urgency, but there's not clarity around what is our intention and what are we going to actually do with this. So I'd say serious capital building depends on innovation. Innovation can happen without producing serious capital. Okay, about any listeners want to bring in a real case challenge you're facing that we can tackle in the 7 minutes we have left? Okay, there's a good invitation. Thanks. Thanks, team. In 7 minutes, we're going to solve your problems, guaranteed, or your money back. So, and your money back means whatever you paid to join us today. So I'm not saying anybody take us up on that offer. I think I'm torn between disappointed and relieved. Oh, Tim, you got one, Tim. Thanks. Give it to me. I see a best advice for new innovation leaders, but I'm going to wait for Tim's case, and then while he's typing it out. Yep. While he's typing it out. Best advice for new innovation leaders. Yeah. One of the things when we talk about a performance system and an innovation system is first take the innovation readiness assessment yourself just to see kind of where you believe the organization stands. Engage others in your organization to do that, because it will allow you to start having a benchmark and a conversation about how mature are we and how developed is it. And I think also just begin doing your own sort of model of what does our innovation system look like, and where do I think we need to build these tent poles? What's going to actually be the most helpful? And then looking into the organization, saying where is there an innovation opportunity that has some urgency around it? That is, it's addressing a need that's prevalent, a need that is that has some severe pain associated with it, and that's costly. And do I have a willing partner in the organization to collaborate with me? I think that is, those are some good places to start. One, let's set a benchmark. Two, let's find a partner. And then maybe three is, you'll see in the tools that we develop, in the frameworks that we offer, that we're really using language that is familiar to the performance side of the organization. We want to talk about portfolios. We want to talk about risk mitigation in terms of the capital impact score. We want to do scoring to create metrics that are meaningful in this space. So understanding their language and way of thinking, and then using that for having those conversations. And finally, I think really working hard to make sure that the innovation system and the performance system are not working in conflict. In most organizations, they're working in conflict, and it's because they're missing some of those essential elements that we've talked about already. So there's always this tension. So you need to be looking at, how can we actually work in concert? How can the innovation system and the performance system work together? Because they're dependent on each other. All right, so Tim has a thought here, a case. We regularly get clients that think they are ready to move into testing a solution, AI apps for a good example. How might we incentivize them to walk backwards with us to fill in the blanks? That's a really good question. For those of you who are familiar with the next cycle is our diagram of what the discovery-driven development process looks like, the journey map for the innovation opportunities. And to what Tim has observed with us before, and I think many of us will observe, is that many teams jump in at solution hypothesis. We believe we have a solution, and they haven't done the work of identifying whether there's real pain or problem that needs to be addressed, and how severe that pain and problem is, because that indicates that there's actually a market opportunity, whatever sector you're in, a market opportunity. There's a large set of people who are going to benefit from this. So how do we create that incentive? I think in part it is to allow the teams to continue to make progress. So how can we support them in moving forward while simultaneously asking them to go back and fill in some of the blanks, understanding that as we learn more, as we do the work around validation, we're going to learn more about what the solution needs to include, and we in fact may get some course corrections that are going to be very helpful. And I think this is where the serious capital building is important, and the concept of making small bets, testing vital assumptions, and entering into an agreement that we're going to work in that way, that can be really important, which is we want to be helpful to you. We actually want to protect capital as we're doing this. We want to mitigate the risk as much as we can of discovery-driven development. So we're going to look at what are the crucial assumptions, sort of looking back, what are the crucial assumptions that we need to test, and we're gonna hold things loosely so that you can continue to go forward, just knowing the farther forward we go without having validated the need or the pain or the problem, the more risk we're putting the capital that we're expending and investing in it. So I think if you create this dissatisfaction around the current process by putting a spotlight on the risk that gets created with moving forward, you might create some appetite or desire to go back. In other words, how might we use the way of framing capital to explain that they're putting capital at risk and probably wasting capital? Yeah, so hopefully I hit on that a little bit. I think if we talk about, if we start ask a question about, is this about creating, protecting, or liberating capital, the activity, what do we think we're doing here? Which form of capital is most important? And then using that worth it tool to really articulate what are the different kinds of risks that we're generating around the most important forms of capital, so that we make that explicit. It's easy to just say, hey, this is risky. But saying something's risky, that we all have different tolerances for risk. But if we are explicit and say, we see these 3, 4, 5 different risk factors, here's the impact of those if they're realized, and here's the probability that they're going to occur, that suddenly gets the attention of the group. So I think that's super important. Thanks, Tim. Great. Really a very important question. Not easy. I think the other thing is, you know, the value of having these tools and these frameworks is it allows us to not only for us to think more clearly and act more clearly on what we're doing, but it allows us to engage others. A framework really organizes the thinking of the group, the thinking of the team. So I think by providing a structured view of what's going on, by providing tools that allow people to do this work themselves, that we're going to build this sort of competency and fluency in our organizations that doesn't exist today. All right, so I think we're at the top of the hour. I would, be happy. I don't know, Chris, if you see any more questions, a last question from the community that we want to address, or if we want to just do our wrap up here. I really appreciate everybody who took time out on their Friday to be with us. As I said, we've really been enjoying. Okay, Tim's got another one. That's great, Tim. We'll take another one. We've really been enjoying this conversation around serious capital building. We are seeing that it's activating people, that they're engaging with it. I think a big part of that is this invitation for people in an organization to make explicit the value that they create, and to align that with the mission of an organization in a powerful way. I think that's one of the things that's really happening. No, I think. All right, Arthur. So we'll see you, Ed. Thanks. Tim, go ahead. I think Chris stepped aside to let you ask your one more. Yeah, there she says, go, Tim. You get priority over the community, because we can answer questions in the community offline. The assessment method requires people to be on the same page. Excuse me, for scoring. Any tips on getting them there? Yeah. So Carlos, our head of technology, is on a plane, I think, right now to Europe. He's going to Ukraine to teach magic again, which is really cool. He's part of the relief effort for families and children. So he would tell me that this is in the backlog. I want our tools to actually support this. I think it's a super important thing, the question you're asking, which is we need to normalize in an organization what we mean by the score. So if I'm going to score capital, capital risk, or I'm going to score capital need, or I'm going to score capital contribution, as an organization, we want to sit down and decide, what do we mean by a 1? What does a 1 look like for us? What does a 2 look like for us? What does a 3 look like for us? We should be building in sort of a generic definition of those, but it should be editable and customizable by teams. And then if you've set up an executive committee, what we call a next board, to make decisions about what's moving forward and what's not moving forward, they ultimately have the say on those definitions. But innovation, some members of your representatives of your innovation teams, your innovation team leaders, your next managers, those people who are responsible for overseeing the discovery-driven development cycle, and your next advocates could be all sitting around a table and reaching a consensus on what do we mean by these scores of 1 through 5. Those become the scores in your tool. And then as we're evaluating, I can always reference, okay, I'm giving it a 2. What does it mean by 2? A 2 looks like this, right? For risk, this is how we've described it in our organization. And I think that is unique to different organizations. So the other thing is, those of you who've seen the Worth It tool demoed, when we look at the capital impact scores, it shows how there's a dashboard. Ultimately, sort of your opportunity is scored, and you can see a dashboard of how are we doing on risk, how are we doing on contribution, how are we doing on need, what's our capital impact, and what's our option value score. Those show thresholds, so a low, medium, and high. And the organization can also define those thresholds. So going in and saying, what are our thresholds? What are we willing to tolerate as what's a yellow? Proceed with caution. What's a green? Keep going. What's a red? Let's stop. A yellow should get me going back and saying, I need to actually improve the score somehow. So what are the levers that we've got to pull the score or to improve the score? And a red is no, we're out, right? We're not moving forward on this one. And a green allows the teams to proceed. We want to have some consensus, and we want to make what those definitions are explicit, so that when people are assigning them, that they're aligned. So it's a super important step to take. Again, we're proposing doing some very hard work, some very rigorous work in all of this. We have a lot of people say, well, that just sounds like a lot. It's like, it sounds hard. And I always ask, what's not hard about the work you do? I think on the performance side, we do lots of hard work. We apply lots of rigor. We haven't done that on the innovation side of our organizations, and we need to, if we want the ability to create capital, to build capital, to create it, to protect it, and liberate it. If we want that to be sustainable and scalable, and I mean sustainable as outliving the current staff and administration, then we're going to have to do that rigorous, disciplined, hard work. So, okay. Well, I appreciate everybody taking time out of your day. Thanks so much for joining this. This is the first, not the last, of these sessions that we're going to do. So thanks to the SolveNext team for organizing it. Thanks to everybody who participated. And we look forward to seeing you online or in person soon. Thanks so much.